Hello and welcome to August. The land. When Julius Fabricius, sub-prefect of the Weald, in the days of Diocletian, owned our lower river field, he called to him Hobdenius, a Briton of the clay, saying, "What about that river piece for laying to hay?" And the aged Hobden answered, "I remember as a lad, my father told your father that she wanted dreening bad. And the more that you neglect her, the less you'll get her clean. Have it just as you've a mind to, but if I was you, I'd drain." So they drained it long and crossways in the lavish Roman style. Still we find among the river drift their flakes of ancient tile. And in drouthy middle August, when the bones of meadows show, we can trace the lines they followed 1600 years ago. Then Julius Fabricius died, as even prefects do, and after certain centuries, imperial Rome died too. Then did robbers enter Britain from across the northern main, and our lower river field was won by Ogier the Dane. Well could Ogier work his war boat, well could Ogier wield his brand. Much he knew of foaming waters, not so much of farming land. So he called to him a Hobden of the old unaltered blood, saying, "What about that river piece? She doesn't look no good." And that aged Hobden answered, "'Tain't for me, not interfere, but I've known that bit of meadow now for 55 year. Have it just as you've a mind to, but I've proved it time on time. If you want to change her nature, you've got to give her lime." And so it goes on. I don't always get on with Rudyard Kipling, but when I was about 13, I came across The Land, and it struck a chord. Generation after generation of Hobdens, who were part of the land in a way those who held the title deeds could never be. Of course, the vexed questions of land ownership in Scotland could never be better asked in poetry than by McCaig in A Man in Assynt. Who owns this landscape? The millionaire who bought it, or the poacher staggering downhill in the early morning with a deer on his back? And if you want to hear a beautiful reading of that glorious and important poem, I'd suggest you check out former Makar Jim McIntosh in the Cateran Eco Museum. I have never understood the assertion that McCaig was a major poet who wrote only minor poems. Oh, really? Well, I think The Land and A Man in Assynt are worth comparing. And I am certain that every pupil in a Scottish secondary school should be exposed to that magnificent McCaig poem, and not just once. Last month we glanced by Kai Miller, and indeed his Rastaman is related to all of this. But who owns this land isn't quite what I'm seeking here. It's actually closer to our hobgoblins, also considered last month. Our essential spirits of the hearth, the close by. We need to identify our own Mus Hobdens, and here are some of mine. Firstly, as a teacher, and I think particularly if you've taught art, you've met Mus Hobden. What makes a school work really well? Management teams, even head teachers, come and go. Frankly, directors of education, very little to do with anything. The person who really knows the school, whose ear hears its heartbeat at best, is the janitor. Never mind the outrageous new job descriptions, facilities managers, just be gone. Let's reclaim that excellent title. Of course, the janitor who doesn't do the job well is a disaster for the school. But the best of janitors breathe with the school. On behalf of all the art teachers, at some point there will be a terrible, terrible spill in your art room. And do the non-art teachers out there know that school sinks are not built with clay traps as those in potteries are? Major design flaw. You'd better be friends with the janitor. And I have met some wonderful Jannies. To the last, a Doric spoken lad who, when I asked about a college room set up with easels for the morning's life class, when I just needed something rather different from my jewellery class, no, I wasn't to do any moving about. He'd have set it out all from me every time. And he did, far more than I asked him to. And I want to raise a glass to all of them, the janitors. Similarly, if you go to St Andrew's Cathedral in Dundee, priests come and go and serve, but the real power lies with the aged sacristan, Tom Macpherson. Bishops are quite literally put in their place, as in, that's where you stand or you'll be hit by a passing censer. I imagine, should a pope ever appear in Dundee, the marvellous Tom will keep him right. There are still what I know as beadles in many kirks, and all sorts of caretakers in various places of worship, like the very vigilant one I remember in our local synagogue. In Dundee University, without any respect to any dean, chancellor or rector, Mus Hobden works at the reception of the Tower building in the form of the extraordinary Muriel Duncan, at present 88 years old. When her farmer father at High Ochnagat told her, "Dinna sit doon, lass, dinna sit doon," her extraordinary energies and smiling wonder are a testament to how well she has followed his advice. And you needn't think the lovely flowers behind her were brought by the university. No, they were brought by Muriel, who makes it work. Hero. And perhaps I have a certain extra feeling for Mus. My Cotter grandparents in Aberdeenshire lived in a way you might recall from Gray's Elegy or perhaps Burns' Cotter's Saturday Night. I've often thought you could paint a Doric version of American Gothic, and it would very much convey something of my beloved grands. The house had an amazing garden, but no running water, no electricity. And of course you'd say, well, that's how it was then. But I'm not so very ancient. Cotters on a highly mechanised farm where the buyers had lighting, milk was pumped directly to waiting transport. The gentleman farmer did not take the welfare of his profitable beasts lightly. He was only careless with his human workers, hard-working people who grew and cooked good food and read and read and read. I'm very proud of them. Perhaps there was or is a Mus Hobden under your own roof, as Robert Hayden found out in those winter Sundays. What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? What an ending. I'll admit I'm straying now, but it's worth it as this is less well known. Here's Kintyre poet Angus Martin on how those cold mornings came to a fisherman's family and what had to be done in a poem called Bait Gathering. That was the coldest of mornings. My father broke ice on the pools of the shore, waiting for ebb. He had gone too early, descending the foot-sculpted stairs, down from his attic bedroom, hearing no light that wintry morning. A small boy dragged a wicker creel with him. His father stirred him, old Duncan, squat and muscular, smelling of tar and fish, and for 30 years obdurate, at the helm of his own skiff, his pride as bright to the end as superlative yacht varnish, his hand as hard as barnacles, and no longer tried by common elements, touched his son, who quivered in sleep, some innocent dream alive in him. "It's time," was all he said. My father woke, and time was in his mouth. He dressed in the chill room, and his shadow danced for him, fantastic on a wall. He broke ice and kicked at darkness. His basket tipped on its side and rocked on the bared ebb stones. Soon he would pack it up with muscles, with frozen hands unfastening them, as child's tears filming his eyes. That fisherman's son torn from sleep, as a living fish in its shell of grace is riven from water. And that comes from Angus's beautiful collection, A Night of Islands, which is on Shoestring Press. So who is the Mus Hobden in the craft shop, where you imagine stock-taking must be nigh impossible? The person who listens, head to one side, and finds that bizarre thing you really want. Or in the independent bookshop or vintage record store, the person who knows that exact title and exactly how to locate it. A bit like that librarian who was hymned by Andy Jackson in Inquiry Desk. Who is the expert tailor who does the magic alteration that turns that outfit for the big do into just what you needed? The waiter who sees you come into your favourite cafe after a trackling sort of day and somehow has the right coffee, maybe a cake in front of you before you'd even ordered. And that was Karen, once of Vizocchi's in Ferry, by the way. Not usually the name above the door. The person who knows the place inside out. I think of the boat handlers on Mighty Swims who knew how the river worked, which currents to hitch on, which ones to work round. Face in the water or behind a wave, no swimmer finds their way to the harbour without their quiet brilliance. The person who makes it all happen and neither expects and all too often doesn't receive the credit they deserve. I'm asking you to find a Mus Hobden and work out how they do their magic and thank them. And I will see you for something rather different in September. Thank you for staying with me.